Straw Hut Media. We're better together with Ann and Heather.
Okay, everybody. Well, I was blown away by today's show for so many different reasons. It's emotional. It's meaningful. It has a context that is a part of my life and my source of pain and sorrow since I have been born. This man, Randy Thomas, comes on and talks about his transformation through a group of people that he was the head of and brings his story to us today. I hope you are as blown away as we are. Am I wrong?
No, I mean, we're going to talk to Randy, who was involved with Exodus. And for those of you who don't know what Exodus is, you will by the end of this show. It is the practice of conversion therapy, which means taking somebody's true sexual identity and trying to pray it away. Spoiler alert, it doesn't work.
Welcome. Better Getter with Ann and Heather today.
We have today Randy Thomas.
Hi, Randy.
We're so excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
There's so much to unpack and so much to talk about. But I think that maybe the way to start would be just to tell us your story a little bit. Your story about coming out to your family, the story of how you got involved with Exodus.
It may be important for me, Randy, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to our audience. In your terms, because I think you've probably gone through some incarnations in your life. Where are you right now?
Well, right now I'm in Orlando, and I am so glad to be here and to be on this show and talking with you. And
Thank you.
It's weird because I've known that I would meet you somehow, some way, someday. And to see this happen today, to talk about such an important film and, of course, topic is just an honor. So thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure. Our pleasure.
Yeah. Well, a little bit about my story. I'm 53 years old, and I grew up the sensitive kid. While all the other kids were knocking each other around on the football field, I was arranging fall leaves by color.
Yes.
Which one should do.
Absolutely, of course.
And
there are so many, so many colors on the spectrum of fall.
Right, exactly. And those leaves need to be organized.
Yes.
So, I was a different kind of kid. I was called all kinds of names. I wondered what sissy was when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
I definitely knew I was gay when I realized I wanted to marry both Bo and Luke Duke.
Yes. Oh.
It took me a couple of seasons to figure out Daisy was a cousin. So
are we talking about Dukes of Hazzard?
Them Dukes.
Yes.
Them Dukes.
Yes.
Yeah, there's some about those Duke boys. But anyway, so I knew I was gay pretty early on. I wasn't raised in the church. We were nominal Christians because my grandmother was one, basically. But my mother had been in the church when she was a younger person or a little girl. And she had instilled in her a very toxic theology about LGBTQ plus people. So at the age of 18, when she found an invitation to a gay Valentine's Day party addressed to my boyfriend and I was still living at home.
Wow.
And the first time I came out, I got thrown out of the house. And
was this soon after she found the envelope addressed to you?
Yeah, she found it actually in my jeans pocket. She went to go do laundry and I'd forgotten to take it out.
So can you describe that in deep? What happened? Did she bring it to you and say, what is this? Or how did that go down?
It went down pretty terribly. She did come to me the next day, asked me to sit on the foot of her bed, and she said, "Are you a homosexual?" And I had always told my friends that if she asked me, I would tell the truth. If my stepdad asked, I would lie. But with her, I was like, yes. And she said, "You're dating?" And I was like, "I have a boyfriend." And she lost it. She absolutely lost her mind. And she was the pillar of my existence. I'd never seen her act like that before. She told me I was dismissed, disinherited, get out the house, don't talk to your brother. You have an hour to pack up whatever you can and get out. And
my God.
So I lived out of my car for 3 weeks, and a drag queen eventually took me in. We won't go down that rabbit trail, but I call her my drag mom, now my drag guardian angel. May she rest in peace, Mela.
Wow.
And I really see her as saving my life. So that's a tragic way of coming out the first time. And when I came out, I was not a healthy person.
How old
at
were
all.
you?
I found the very dark side of the party scene really quick, and developed even more. I mean, my household had been abusive growing up and those types of things. So I got involved in abusive relationships.
Right.
I abused drugs. I was not a good person myself. And so that all drove me to the bottom really quick. And in 1992, I was searching for answers. I went to a 12-step program for a little while. And I eventually became a Christian. And unfortunately, that led to I won't say the name of the church, but a particular church that seemed really groovy and hip and all this good stuff, but they had a special program for the gays. And it happened to be an Exodus referral program. And I went into the meeting very skeptical. But because they were addressing issues that weren't really even about sexuality, but like codependency and things like that, I was hooked. And so the hook was the legitimate issues, but they tied it back to this whole toxic view of LGBTQ plus. That you're a codependent because you're gay. You're a sex addict because you're gay. You know, it wasn't just, you're just a human with issues just like other humans. It always got tied back to being gay.
Can I stop for a minute? Was this the first time you were able to kind of openly talk about your sexuality?
Yes. And that's a very good observation, because that was one of the other hooks.
Right.
It's the first time I felt safe
talking about
to really communicate my heart. Absolutely.
So I know we've talked about this. I don't like to merge things together, but we're living in a world where we understand Scientology, we understand programming. Was this a part of a program kind of that you were brought into? And if you don't mind just giving us a little bit of a timeline, how old were you at this point?
This was when I was in my early 20s. So I think I was around 23. It was 1992. I was born in 68. So whatever that math was.
Yeah. We're not going to test you or our audience.
By the way, people are listening now, but we air this on the Monday, and they will be able to see that Randy's looking good for his age.
You certainly are. I have to say, my friend, you're handsome, and your shirt, everybody needs to know where you got that shirt, because that is beautiful and matches the art behind it, which everybody will be able to see on YouTube. Randy, when you're brought into a place, do you feel like you were manipulated when you were brought in by saying these are some issues, and then they tied it to your sexuality, but what you were being offered was a place of compassion, warmth, and honesty where you could reveal who you were?
Yeah. Yes. The short answer. And the group that I was involved in really disarmed me, because I was expecting the Bible thumping, blue hair, you're going to hell kind of manipulation. Right. And they didn't do any of that. The way they hooked and manipulated me into the group was the very first night I went, they didn't even talk about homosexuality. They talked about emotional dependency. And that topic just nailed me. I mean, right here, because that was my core. That was how I related to people. So it hit me where I was living. And I'd never heard that. And it really did help me as far as the emotional dependency was concerned. But the problem is that they were infusing that stigma and that toxic theology within all of it. So while I was getting these morsels of life-giving insight on emotional dependency, I was being taught to kill myself metaphorically.
Yes.
And because I was gay.
Right.
And so it was a weird mix.
And that's really where they get you, don't they? But it's like, I call it the flip side. Like, you're being told one thing's the truth, but the actual opposite is the truth. So it gets very confusing, especially when you're in a religious context. You're being taught, simpling it down. You're being taught, Jesus is love, but at the same time, you're being abused in your household. So it doesn't make any sense in the name of God. And are those two things, were they merged for you for a while? How long did you stay in that program? And if you wouldn't mind, honoring us with the understanding of what that program was for you.
Well, I was a part of, and by the way, that's a great parallel, where you get taught one loving thing, but you're also getting that same fusion of stigma. And I think that was very eloquently put. I'm going to borrow that, actually.
Please do. We're here to help each other. But that, to me, that confusion is where I think most of the vulnerability lies when we're seeking a source of groundedness with ourselves, acceptance with ourselves. And it's brought in right at the very moment where you're being given a gift and punishment at the same time. And that creates in us a 0 point where we then are open to develop in something that neither feels safe or protected.
Exactly.
Maybe we should just stop for a minute and talk about how you have, and I don't know that if it's accurate for me to describe this as a sort of a cult, but you were raised in what you call a cult.
Well, and again, a lot of, for me, is definition and what that means, because it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Would you, Randy, say that you were involved in a cult?
When I first came out the second time, I don't recommend coming out twice. Just do it once. When I came out the second time, I don't know that I would have thought that, but I watched the Scientology docuseries
with Leah Remini.
And I saw the NXIVM docuseries, and it hit me like every episode. I'm like, okay, the circumstances were completely different.
Yep.
But the emotional manipulation, the language redefinition, the system of rewards and punishments, it was all the same. And so now I don't have a problem saying that I was involved in a cult, because how it operated in its dynamics and everything just is a very good parallel. The circumstances were different, of course, but I would consider it a cult.
And was it a circumstance? Sorry, I think I've been so confused about this for so long. And as our listeners are paying attention, this hasn't only been an interest for me, but also my mother, Nancy H., is very much involved in one of these systems of greeting you with a confidence of being accepted and punishing you with the ramifications of what they believe God's wrath on you should be. Let's
also understand the terms, right? Is it conversion therapy? Some people call it ex-gay therapy, reparative therapy. It's all outrageously horrendous. But
yes.
but that is what your mom is involved in.
Conversion therapy. And is this what you would say you were involved in 23? You were in a conversion therapy system.
I would. And reparative therapy is just the forerunner to conversion therapy. It was what provided all the approach and resources that developed into conversion therapy. Not that it's really that much different. I think that ex-gay ministry is definitely conversion therapy, because it's the religious form of what's being done in the professional's office. The approach is the exact same. Conversion therapy believes that the family dynamics created the hurt and ache and all this other stuff that created homosexuality, which is so not true.
So I'm sorry. I'm just going to just for clarification. There is a story that is told that is said, because of what was messed up in your childhood, you have become gay.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Dysfunctional family dynamics
Yes.
create a mother wound and a father wound, and it turns into this really twisted formula. And I sit here and think, how did I ever buy into that? But it's true. And they do blame it on the families. And this really is very dangerous to families, because families could have been healthy and good and had a lot of really great things about them, but they're being taught that they did something wrong when they didn't.
Right.
And it can be very, very damaging to families.
Well, if I may, I mean, of course, I know that my mother, Nancy, thought if she prayed enough for me that I would become healed, I wouldn't have to be with Ellen. That would be something that from what you're teaching me, is described as something that happened to me because of the abusive childhood I was brought up in. So she could blame it on my father. She could blame it on his being gay. She could blame it on his not being able to be open sexually. And because of all of that, the abuse and the damage then meant I was damaged. It wasn't really my fault. It was how I was brought up. He fucked it up for me. And I then could get on the other side of whatever she considered this disease to be. How long were you in this particular therapy? And were you speaking to your mother after the unfortunate misstep of her asking you to leave the house?
Well, it was pretty rocky there for a really long time. And even when I got involved in the Exodus support group, she still didn't understand it. She was like, I really wish you'd quit talking about all that gay stuff and just go get married, and
right. That'll solve all your problems. We all know that marriage just solves every problem in the world, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. and she, now today, like, I'm getting married to the love of my life, Dan, in October.
Congratulations.
I was going to say today. I hope we're invited.
And my mom is right now planning on being there. So we've come a very long way. And
well, can I just say congratulations on that?
Thanks.
I mean, there's nothing I don't think. I think Heather's probably fantasy is being able to be at all of your gorgeous gay friends' weddings, really, and be the best man. That's like there's a lot of celebration and people finding love in our podcast and in our life.
We're all of a similar age, and I was just talking about this earlier when we were talking about having you on, that I always say that I feel my most self around my gay male friends. And I know why. It's because I grew up with my best friend from the first grade who is gay, but we didn't have the language for it back then. So back then I would always say, Tony, if you were a girl, what are you going to wear for free dress tomorrow? And then we'd talk about our outfits and he'd pick my outfits. Or I'd say, Tony, if you were a girl, which boy would you think is the cutest? And he's like, if I was a girl, and we just didn't have the language. We just didn't know. We just didn't know what it was,
Do you think that's part of the vulnerability of why this has been able to survive this long? Conversion therapy to me seems so outdated, and I understand it's not. And that's part of what's so
well, it is. It's actually illegal in many states now. And in 2009, the American Psychological Association concluded that there is insufficient evidence to support the use of psychological interventions to change somebody's sexual orientation.
Meaning mind games and hypnotism
do not work.
Right.
Do not work. But would you consider that it is a mind game and hypnotism that is what conversion therapy is about?
It's definitely mind game, and it's religious abuse. And 700,000 people have been victimized by this conversion therapy in some way, shape, or form. And that's at the time that they were doing the research during the Pray Away film. There is conversion therapy happening right now.
I know.
But am I right in saying that it is illegal in many states? I know it's illegal in my state, California.
Right. It's illegal for minors. But that doesn't stop it from happening in things like the ex-gay group and the churches and things like that.
And who's going to stop them? I mean, these are religions. They're housing the lies of their hypnotism behind closed doors, as religion has done for years. I'm so grateful to be talking to you, but I want to keep us on a timeline for our listeners. What happened to you as a teenager is horrific. I don't want to keep saying that same word. But we're at the point
now where
we're in conversion center. Yes, and I want to talk about that time.
And Exodus ultimately is the vice president of Exodus.
So you started at 23. If we could just
get us to Exodus.
Get us to Exodus, would you?
Right.
Get us to
Well,
exiting Exodus.
Get us to Exodus so we can exit.
So we can exit Exodus for everybody,
Right,
hopefully.
right.
And by the way, your courage is incredible, and I know it's not easy.
No,
So thank you.
I appreciate
you.
that. Well, I started out as a participant, of course, and after about a year or two, I found my voice, which is going to sound weird. Like when I grew up, I was never allowed to talk in the house.
Oh my gosh.
Well, after I got out in the bars and was doing the drugs and whatever, that's when I would talk. But
Sure.
when I was involved in the support group or the conversion therapy group, I found my voice. And they gave me opportunity to share my story. And of course, I changed it to fit what would bring me the applause because I was desperate for attention. And apparently I can tell a good story. And so they would put me in front of different groups to share my story of overcoming and freedom from. And I eventually started teaching at the group. I started teaching at regional conferences and national conferences. And then the Exodus office started asking me to do like local interviews with media outlets and things like that. And so I started to get a name within that circle. It's not something I'm proud of. I don't say that to...
This is exactly the courage that I'm talking about, and why I want to slow you down, if you don't mind. When you say you're in front of a group, we are all, I think, somewhat aware of what a 12-step program would be, where you stand up in front of others and you say, "I am this, and I am wrong about this, and I'm God, I'm overpowered by this, and I'm going to convert." Did you go into a? I can make some assumptions. Did your story become about how this circumstance had allowed you to become a heterosexual, and that you had been saved by that?
Right. Well, I would always share about how I was in the process of changing.
Got it.
I never felt comfortable saying I was a full-on raging heterosexual. I mean,
interesting. In the process of change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like when you went home
sell
and you put your head down on the pillow and it was just you, are you thinking to myself, like, I know who I am and it's not working? Or do you just not let yourself think that?
No, you're thinking it's working.
Yeah,
you're in
don't.
it
I did.
to win.
I did not allow myself to think that, and any thoughts to the contrary, that was Satan. And temptation, and
yes,
and you learn to compartmentalize your life. All that's good with the goal of changing, you keep.
Yeah.
Anything that's a challenge to that, you immediately discard it.
And are there ways to discard? Are there challenges that you have, or tools that you are growing within the group, within yourself, that allow you to not have the feelings that you're actually feeling? How do you do it?
No. And basically,
that's why you can't do it, because there's nothing true about it. Yeah.
You have to, when you would have struggles, like when I developed a crush on a personal trainer one time,
haven't we all?
I mean, seriously, but you would have to confess. And so the act of confession put all the power into the person you're confessing to.
Got it. Yes. So much like Catholic Church.
Right. And so that helped condition the brain to say, okay, I don't want to have to go to that person again.
Right.
So I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to do this.
Would you be resolved when you would confess? Were there languages around? Was there a language around? I mean, if it's Catholic, it's Hail Mary, or you say, were there things that you were given to be like a biscuit of?
It's called penance in the Catholic Church.
There you go. And so that you would walk away feeling resolved, and that you wouldn't until that next feeling came up, then you wouldn't have to go back.
Well, not really. I mean, there would be, because there would be, "Oh, we love you. We're so sad that you developed a sinful attraction towards your personal trainer."
And you're like, "Have you seen him?"
I'm like, "But have you seen him?" No, but it was like, you grieve the heart of God. So let's pray that for forgiveness for committing adultery against your God. And so,
So
we
even
would
even a sexual thought was committing adultery against your God who you were to be wedded with. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to also put a pin in that for a second. That's what my mother used to say to me.
Right.
I wish I would be dead because I'm married to Jesus. So anything that you're doing, and I said, so why don't you just get rid of yourself? I'm like, well, I don't understand. Well, that's a sin.
She would be dead.
That
So
all
she
she
could
would
be
want to do
married
is to go
Jesus?
to Jesus, and that would only happen after life, but she couldn't take her own life. And again, another confusing thing to me, and I'm such a smart ass. I'm like, well, then why don't you just kill yourself? Like, sorry, that's really, oh, well, she can't, because of course that's against the rules. So with these, exchanges of who would tell you you're okay at doing something and not okay with doing something. Basically, you're just bottling up every single emotion you could possibly have, and you're trying to find any girl who you could at least maybe pretend with. Are you in that search of somebody? Please, God, couldn't I please just fall in love with the opposite sex? It'd be great for me. Were you wishing that? Sometimes, like, I wish I wasn't. I don't want to be this because of how much I'm being punished. Punished.
Right.
Could somebody please just come along and be my girl? Were you wishing that?
Well, of course. And I had determined early on that I was called to a lifetime of celibacy. But I did date a woman for a little while. And when it comes to the Kinsey spectrum, there's a smidge of bisexuality in me. And at the time in Exodus, when I first started to recognize that, I thought it was change.
Got it.
But later I realized that I've always been that way. Like, I had a crush on Janet Jackson right alongside the Bo and Luke Duke.
Right. Yep.
But then, like, I wouldn't have an attraction toward a woman for years. Right.
Right.
But
what is the Kinsey spectrum? I don't know what that means.
Kinsey was a researcher, and he helped develop the spectrum of sexuality.
Okay.
And people, you can be completely 100% platinum gay, or you can be bisexual, or, straight. And people usually end up somewhere in the middle. They're not usually all just one particular
Well, I
sexual
wish they would have known
orientation.
that when I stood up for equal rights.
Actually,
that would have been wonderful if I
have
was somewhere in the middle.
They call themselves platinum gays, and I know what they mean.
Now it's on the Kinsey spectrum. So
I just learned that like 2 weeks ago.
Okay,
good.
There you go.
See, you're not so far behind. That's why we have this podcast, to learn more.
We say you listen to our podcast, you either learn something, you can get something done while you're watching us or listening to us rather, or
you just become a little bit better for it and give it a little bit more kindness as you go about your week. When you are experiencing your voice, that I know that feeling, we know that feeling, it becomes very empowering.
Very.
And the praise that you're getting is filling a hole, if I could so speak, filling a hole for the thing that you're losing. So it starts to feel comfortable, right? It starts to feel like, this is who I am. Were you in that phase of your life for a while as you were going in getting up the ranks, if you will, that one of those things was filling in a necessity? Something felt good. People were liking you. They enjoyed what you were talking about. You tell great story. You were engaging people in an uprise in themselves to say, I can overcome this thing that I've been told is horrible. I can do it. I can heal myself. I can be that. Was that empowerment something that drove you? Did that become kind of like a bit of a drug for you?
It was, and it was very much like a drug. When entire congregations would stand up and clap.
Yes.
That's numbing. It's addicting. And it was something that I had never had in my life before. I'd not had affirmation like that before. And eventually, like, I was always a true believer. I never had a moment where I was standing on a stage going, I don't believe this.
Right.
But I was always a true believer. And I think that conviction and the ability to tell a good story is what propelled me into the regional conferences and then the national conferences, and eventually joining the staff here in Orlando. That's why I moved here, to join the Exodus staff here. And so it was very much a numbing effect, a very addicting effect, but it was also killing me slowly.
But it also became a job too, right? Like, it became the way you supported yourself.
Do you get paid for it?
Right.
Well, he was, I would imagine he was the vice president. And
I'm just wondering because in some churches and some, it's the devotion that is your thing. And then part of what keeps you in the devotion is that you're taken care of by the community or by the congregation, and your addiction allows you to not go get another job. You aren't seeking your own financial support, and that part of that weakness. And I just want to, you mentioned earlier that you were part of an abusive. There are two sides to it, because I think it's a patterning, because you're raised in an abusive childhood. Nobody talks to you about that, so that's serviced and quieted by the rise of your spirit in a different place where you're starting to feel like you're a part of a community. But it's not necessarily financial, and that's part of the abuse of getting into this kind of congregation. Am I wrong about that?
You're right. When I first moved down here and joined the Exodus staff, I think I made like 24,000 a year, and which was very low.
That's right.
At the time. But as I got promotions and things like that, I made a decent salary, and I don't mind my saying, because people ask all the time.
Yes.
The most I ever made there was 62, and that's a really good living.
Yes.
I wish I made that now.
Right.
But it was never, I can honestly say it was never for the money. Right. I mean, getting the paycheck was cool, but I really thought I was called to it. So even if I didn't get the paycheck, which I didn't for years, all the leadership that I did at Exodus, or I mean at the local ministry before joining Exodus, I didn't make any money.
So how would you support yourself?
I had a second job, a pay the bills job.
Yep.
And then I would spend 30, 40 more hours a week doing the local ministry stuff.
It's a brutal amount of work, isn't it?
It is.
Service to God is a brutal amount of work. And we hear about it in terms of missionaries, which is what I always heard about when I was a kid. It really is 24-hour devotion. You're on call, and anything that you are doing is in the name of it.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And do they keep you isolated? Awful. Did you live in a community atmosphere? Am I asking too many specific questions? I'm so curious about how this adulthood has transformed your life, and you have had the courage to get out of it, because I think it's very rare that we get to speak with somebody with that kind of transformation.
Thank you. And no, we didn't live in a commune. Like, I always lived alone.
But what about the friends that you had when you were openly gay? Did you have to shun them?
I did. But it was all in the name of, okay, we're just growing in different directions.
Right. And there were always pleasantries.
I found Jesus. I really hope you will.
Yeah.
I gotta go. That kind of stuff. And it was horrible. The way I ended some of those friendships was just horrible. And it's something that I need to make amends to them for. And where I can, or where I could, I have, and I need to find some more. Mel and I, the drag queen who took me in, we became good friends before she passed. And anyway, so yeah, it was very difficult.
I'm glad you got that closure. She sounds amazing.
She is amazing.
When you were experiencing the fervor of belief that you're on the path, and this is what God wants for you, your calling, as you say, were you looking at porn? Were you interested in ever going to a sexual arena? Did you hide it, or were you completely out? I mean, and I'm talking about this, and I can say these questions might seem a little raw, but the fact of the matter is I was raised by a man who lived a double life, pretending that one was in the church and in the service, and I'm singing every Sunday morning with him going, praise God, praise God. And meanwhile, that's why I considered the destruction of my life his inability to tell the truth, that there were two doors, and one got walked through with the Christians, or I should say the leaders of a hypnotism, and one was being paralleled. How did you deal with those two conflicting things inside you?
Well, I actually was one of the few who didn't live a double life.
Who did not?
I was not looking at porn. And anytime I had temptations, which were actually natural inclinations that I should have embraced.
I like that language.
I would confess immediately to my mentor, to my boss, to other male friends. And, but, you know, and I've listened to a couple of your podcasts, so I can get pretty detailed here.
Okay, good. We like it.
Masturbation was not allowed.
Oh, not allowed. See, there
It's
you
not
go.
allowed in the Catholic Church either, but I had it.
Right.
No.
It was not allowed, but I was really good at it.
Yeah.
And so I had to do a lot of confessing.
Did you have to confess every time?
Every time.
Oh my
Oh
God.
my God.
I just clear history. That's all I do. That's my confession. Clear history. I don't know who's
I
going to
think
see
Heather's
it.
life and your life probably weren't that paralleled in terms of your sexuality, but you know, you're getting there, Heather.
Clear history last 24 hours. Nobody will know.
Forget that Uber driver. Check.
Well, it was like, I mean, come on, the personal trainer? Jeez. Anyway.
You have such a cute smile, by the way.
I
It's
know,
so fun
he's
to talk to you.
adorable.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
you can be a member of our tribe now. We,
Well, he
we
already
have
is.
no punishment.
I definitely want to be a part of your tribe.
We
That
want
would
to.
be
We
awesome.
want you.
We want you to
You're in.
confess, but only the good stuff.
Okay, well, let me go find a picture of him. Not that I kept one or four. You know, so.
So you did. I love it. You're sharing. First of all, you have to understand the miracle of why Better Together is and what we talk about. The whole purpose of this show is to share story and learn from others so that we can further each other in the kindness of what it is to live in love. So your story is helping us. By the way, by you telling me, it's helping me heal some shit that hasn't come out in my life because of your courage. And I wish to God that somebody had gotten to my father, somebody had been able to give him the strength to do what you've done. So I want to talk to you about what happened, what that moment was when you went, okay, I'm a leader. I got everybody behind me. I got these crowds. They're up and at 'em. I believe what I'm saying. And yet, what did stop that
What was
train?
the exit from Exodus?
What was the exit from Exodus?
Well,
Yeah.
it's a long story, but I'll try to keep it short. But in 2000, I joined this staff in 2002. And when I got there, you know, my first job, and it stayed a part of my responsibility the whole time, was to oversee the member agencies in the network. And when I saw what was happening across the country, I was mortified. I said that my secondary title was Chief Fire Putter Outer.
Wow.
Because people were sleeping with clients all the time. I had to report therapists all the time. I had to call the police quite a few times.
So the therapists were cheating on their own point of view. So the therapists would be cheating with the clients, with you guys.
Yes. And there were even some therapists that I threw out of the networks. Now, I'm conservative at this point. I'm a religious right. I will call myself a nut job because that's what I was. And even I am throwing out therapists from Exodus because they're using their clients as guinea pigs. And even right now, that breaks my heart, some of the memories that I have of that. But I would have to call the licensing boards and even local authorities and say, we've gotten this report, blah, blah, blah.
So you were
when I
like a
got
professional tattletale on the professionals.
pretty much. Yeah. And I was also in charge of making sure that if anything got out publicly, that we handled it.
And what would you have to do to handle that?
I would call like this one person, he was caught going into a bathhouse and he was caught on tape. And so there was an activist threatening to release the tape publicly. And this guy was freaking out. And so I did crisis management. I basically guided him through, do not say anything, do not do this, blah, blah, blah. And I talked to the activist and convinced that person to not release it. So I was the fixer.
Wow.
In some ways.
Yeah.
And it's a regret that I have. But that was at the same time, every single time it was just chipping away at that denial wall.
And this is what year? This is early 2000s or
2000s through, and I helped close Exodus in 2013.
You left Exodus in 2013.
No, I helped shut it down.
You helped shut it down.
And that effectively left me out of a job. But to get back to the story
yes, please.
of
Yes, we're listening.
how I exited Exodus, how I made an exodus from Exodus.
Yes.
And another important pivot point was the 2008 election, because the night that Obama was elected the first time, at the time I wasn't happy about it, but I was very happy that Prop 8 had been struck down, and anti-gay marriage amendments had passed all over the country. So I was talking a good game on social media about having won all these things because we had traveled all around the country, sharing our stories. And I think it was that night, and I still get emotional thinking about it, the LGBTQ plus community all over California just poured out into the streets.
Wow.
I had never seen anything like it before. And they were showing scenes on the TV, and I would see these couples just mourning and wailing and grieving, and the anger and that still small voice. I'm still a spiritual person. There was a small voice inside of me as I watched, and I got goosebumps everywhere. And I said, how could I have done that to my own people?
Oh my goodness.
And it was the first time I'd ever had the thought of, this is my community. It was the first time I'd had that thought in years. And it broke my heart. And I just cried and cried for the rest of the night. And I never told anybody that.
Do you remember that? That's.
I do.
What an incredible moment that must have been for you.
It was. And it speaks to the power of when you humanize something, when you humanize an issue, it defeats stigma.
Yes.
And
Amen.
when you get out there and you speak your truth and you show the truth and you stand up for the truth bravely, which every person who went into the streets that night did.
Yep.
That is the power to change hearts and minds. And even though that night wasn't the night that I left Exodus,
it was the night you left a little bit.
Absolutely.
I call it rippling and tripling what you're doing, because when we share our stories and what you've just done is connect us to a moment in history and time, which is making me emotional. I mean, those of us who come out, share our truth, but then you connect it with history. And I think that's why I keep telling you to please give us a timeline, because you just rippled and tripled that, whatever you got from that moment, giving gratitude back to those who went out on the streets and went, listen, this is something that is meant to be seen, and you carrying the torch of that. And of course, that's what we're doing at Better Together with Aaron and Heather. We're trying to speak the truth so that the truths can be witnessed, recognized, and joined with one another so that they become more powerful. And I feel like that's where you are right now in your journey. You went from that moment, that night, and then what happened?
Well, what happened is a bulldog or a pity mix is trying to get in.
He wants in on this, man. Look at that. Oh, no, he's giving you some love. I think he felt the ripple and triple.
Yeah.
Wait, I have a question.
Like, go, Daddy. You go. You speak your truth.
I have a question while we're in this pause of sort. Did you ever think, or did you ever talk with? Because I'm a Southern California girl. I grew up in Southern California, and I'm thinking to this time, and I've always surrounded myself with my gay friends. I feel most at home with my gay friends. I consider myself part of that community, and I raised my kids in such a way that my kids and many kids in Los Angeles, they don't even understand that it's a thing. When my daughter was like 3 years old, she was in a gymnastic class and she was like, "Mom, I think Dante and Uncle should get married." I'm like, "Yeah, I bet Uncle would like that. Dante's like this." But like, it was never, and I can give you 1,000 other examples. I always make the joke that my son had to come out as straight to me. But in Los Angeles, in the community that I live in, there are I can think of 3 different couples on my street that are same-sex marriages. So like here, it's just an easier place to be. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder if you all knew that back then, because I think you grew up in the South, which is a little bit different. Were you aware that there was that life?
No, the life of freedom, where you could say, I am, and it wasn't in dinner theater, because that's
right.
That's where it mostly was in the 80s.
It just
in dinner theater with the actors.
Like my kids don't even think that a gay marriage is any different than a traditional marriage. They just it doesn't even blip on the radar with them. Like I remember recently asking my son. He has friends that were twins at a Catholic school, at a conservative Catholic school, and I'm like, how is so and so, with his sister so open? And my son just looked at me like, huh, what? I don't understand the question you're asking me. And I'm like, that's awesome.
Well, that's awesome. That's a very city life child growing up.
But yeah. I genuinely want to know if you knew that was out there at the time.
I didn't. Growing up, I didn't. We didn't have a lot of the representation you have now.
Well, we didn't have it either in the 80s.
Zero option.
But I did describe to you in the 80s how I would say to my friend, if you were a girl. We didn't have that then. But certainly by, late 90s and 2000s. It was,
well, I mean, if I'm incorrect, you can't lead with fear when there are other possibilities. And that's in the life of abuse or any whatever the abuse is. You called the abuse of religion, which I think is there's sexual abuse, there's physical abuse, there's mental abuse. In abuse, you are closing down the walls of anything that looks at the other side. Is one of its intents, and it is, yes, intense to feel, but the intent of it is the closure around things that will open up any experience of the other side. If you know that there's a place where it's free, you certainly ain't going to talk to your kid about it. You want it to shut down, and that's why these systems of religious abuse can work, because they literally put you behind closed doors and you are shut off. The experience is not to be educated. That's also part of why the education system is one of the things that as we keep our children dulled down, they are not in the experience of what is other, and that's how we keep them in the service of, okay, great, I will go pick up an M16 and blow somebody away, because I'm not understanding the other side, and it's given me an opportunity out. And I think that's where they dealt with it a lot of. But the gay issue was, there is nothing else. You're going to be fucked if you don't choose our side, because the other one wasn't shown to you as an option. It's not like they put it in front of you and go pick your way. There is no way. That's how they hypnotize you. Right. If there is no way, you're going to burn in hell. That's what the devil is saying. No, you can't go have an open relationship with a guy in Los Angeles.
West Hollywood and be happy.
You can't just move to Los Angeles and be Heather Duffy's kid. You're screwed. But would you? First of all, I feel like that is the dumbing down of the education system, especially in religion, that keeps the lies behind closed doors and kids not learning their highest potential. Are we in a place where we are moving out of that? Do you believe that there is an opening up through people who are working like the way that you do to expose it, and that it's beginning to be eased up? Or do you believe it's still the same disease shutting people down for their sexuality that it was when you were going through it?
Well, in Pray Away, the film, Michael Bussey, who actually started Exodus and has been trying to shut it down for 40 years. He was only in it the first 2 years it was in existence. But he says as long as there's homophobia and transphobia, these beliefs and these groups and conversion therapy will exist in some way, shape, or form. It's too entrenched. It's the default go-to for evangelical Christianity.
Yes.
And people don't realize that.
Can you repeat that? What does that mean, the default go-to for evangelical Christianity?
There are so many, and I hate that I had a part in this, but there are so many resources from ex-gay works and conversion therapists on church, probably every conservative church library. And so when someone comes to that particular church, please, Jesus, take them somewhere else. But if they end up in that conservative church, they're going to be given those books. They're going to be told to go to this ministry or that therapist or both. And it's still the default. That's why it's such a pernicious ideology, and why the moment that I and other leaders left, 3 more took our place.
What does pernicious ideology mean, please?
It's the belief system that's just pervasive, and it has a very sneaky is not the best word, but it's just a very sinister type of pervasiveness within.
It's a duplicity within its teaching.
Right. And it controls and it holds on to. When it comes to conversion therapy, it just controls you. It perpetuates itself. And what you were mentioning earlier, we were taught, and then I helped teach, unfortunately, that like healthy gay relationships were darkness. Right. That they were living in darkness. That's right. Not in the light of Christ.
That's right.
And you can't fellowship with darkness.
That's right.
And if you even
exclusion
have the thought
therapy
of doing
is part
that,
of it. Mm-hmm.
you have to confess, and so it was very isolating, which is another cult kind of move.
It is. It absolutely is. Keeping behind closed doors. You don't share. One of the things that was done in my family, we kept moving and moving and moving. Why did we move? Because if you moved, then you wouldn't be around anybody that you felt comfortable enough to tell what was going on behind your closed doors.
But do you think now, in retrospect, that maybe you moved because somebody was onto your dad? And
yes. I mean, also he was a criminal, and I think probably the cult. Yes, I think there was probably criminal activity, and also poverty is a big. That's why I was asking you about the finances. We could really digress into a lot of nitpicky things because all of it is a foundation of how do we create an abusive relationship that keeps people out of the love that they can feel for themselves and puts it into service for us. Would you agree that is the statement of why people do this? Why would this conversion therapy be so interesting? Why would we hand people so many books if we didn't want them to be in service of the power that we were offering? Is that what you feel that why is it so important to these facilities, these systems to exist? Why do they do it?
They do it because they believe that's their only option. They're taught that
for
survival, to honor God, to honor themselves, to honor the truth.
But I'm talking about the leaders now. I mean, the leaders are doing it, and they have to be wise enough to be able to say they know what they're doing. Anybody who has a fellowship and a foundation in a congregation that lives in you're servicing them they are smart enough people to understand that they're a manipulative group.
Well, but at the same time, we honestly thought that what we were doing was the right thing to do.
Got it.
We did know, I mean, our whole goal was to convince people to convert to our way of thinking, to change their behavior, to be godly, and to embrace heteronormative biblical stereotypes, basically. Uh-huh. And so we knew that we were trying to convince people, but we honestly thought that's what God wanted us to do.
Got it.
That was the answer for a healthy, happy life.
So how did you change that answer in your mind? How did that flip then for you?
Well, I had a bunch of moments like that Prop 8 moment. But unfortunately in 2013, and I'll try to keep it together. If I don't, you can edit it out. But
we're here and we support you and we'll bring it in the light.
Thank you. Well, leading up to 2013, my boss, Alan Chambers, had done 3 interviews with Lisa Ling. And in those interviews, he was confronted and asked really important questions. And he confessed that he believed that if a gay person said that they believed in Jesus, that they would be in heaven with us. And by the 3rd show, he was put in a group of survivors, and they just lit into him. And it really broke his heart. But because he had participated in those programs and he had softened his stance as far as you can be gay and Christian, it caused a civil war within Exodus.
Wow.
We had over 200 agencies. And if you've ever heard of really terrible denominational splits, this was the nonprofit version of that. It was it was one of the most excruciating things I've ever been through, watching people that I had loved and respected turn on a dime. And so in 2012, I was tasked with, because we were losing supporters, we were losing member agencies. We didn't really know what our messaging was anymore because we had determined that people weren't really changing. And people didn't want to give to an organization that didn't know what it was doing. And so as the vice president at the time, I was already determining whether we should close or rebrand or what. But unfortunately, on January 28th, I got a phone call that my friend Michael, who I had known since 1992, actually 1990, had committed suicide. And and the reason why he did is because he thought that God was punishing him for being in a gay relationship. Some terrible things had happened in that relationship that was very unhealthy and wrong. But because of the ideology that we both ascribed to, that I was promoting, he felt like God was punishing him. And that ideology, that conversion therapy ideology, led my friend, who was a Mensa member, who was one of the most funny, smart, beautiful men I've ever met in my life, led him to think that he had to commit suicide because God was punishing him.
Wow.
And so when I got that call, if you can imagine blinders, gone. And I was just like, this was Michael. I wish I'd listened to the stories that had come to me before, where people had told me similar stories, but I didn't. It took Michael. I could not excuse it away. I could not go into denial. I could not numb it. I could not comfort myself out of it. It forced me to take the most fearless moral inventory I've ever taken in my life, and it crushed me. And I realized that I'm going to do this report for Exodus because it's already a decision on whether to close it or not.
Well, now it's all in your hands as well, right?
Right. And
Holy cow.
and when Michael did this, I was like, I told my boss, I said, Exodus has failed its mission. Nobody's changing. And not only that, it is a tool of death and destruction, and it murdered my friend. So whether the board takes this report and chooses to close Exodus or not, I'm leaving after that board meeting. And he said, I've already come to the same conclusions. I want you in that meeting. And so we presented, he approved the report. We went into the board meeting. And on June 19th of 2013, the board unanimously decided to close Exodus, not give it to somebody else to run to continue the abuse, but to close it. And that is a day I celebrate every year. And it's the first day. It's the first day that I actually showed true leadership in supporting that decision and helping to shut down Exodus.
Wow.
Thank you.
That's powerful.
Thank you for doing that. Thank you for sharing it with us on Better Together with Ann and Heather. But thank you for doing that and seeing the truth.
I know you said several times in this interview that you hated the part that you played in Exodus, but I have to say that
You played the most important.
you played the most important part.
Most important part.
In the end, and the work that you're doing now in talking about it is way more important than that time that you are apologizing for. So I hope you feel the value
I really
in what you're doing.
appreciate that. I really appreciate that. I have come to terms with that. Throughout the whole time that I was at Exodus, people would prophesy or give words of knowledge over me and say, God's going to raise you up in front of the entire world to tell the truth about homosexuality. At the time, I don't think anybody knew that it was going to be on Netflix, and it was going to be coming from this perspective.
I know. I mean, Netflix, pray away.
Amen.
Fantastic. But we cannot let you go without. I think that one of the most important things that we can do here today on our show is that if there is some 14-year-old kid out there listening, or somebody that has the sense to send this to somebody who needs to hear it, I know that there's lots of resources for that. I know that you have a blog that has a lot of resources. Let's talk to those people that might need to know that they're loved and supported by so many people. I can give you a shortcut and say, move to West Hollywood. Ann and I will love you. It's much easier.
Come on out, baby.
It's much easier in California.
There's a place to have your wedding.
You're loved here. But if you're stuck in Mississippi or Oklahoma, nothing against them, but I'm just saying, let's talk to those kids out there, and, or even adults that haven't been able, because God knows, I know several adults who
we need it. What do you have to say to us?
What are the resources? What advice can we give them? How can we wrap our arms around them and support them in a way that they need Yep.
Well, I fully believe that there will be young people, teenagers, young adults, parents. I know that they're going to watch this. Yes. And I know that you're watching me right now. And what I would say is that I know in your heart of hearts, you want to have permission to love your LGBTQ plus child in a way that's life-giving. Ex-gay ministries and conversion therapies do not give life. In fact, there are very small bubbles, and what will happen is they will hook you in, as I shared earlier in the video, and they will redefine reality. But the truth is that we live in a day and age where there is a huge LGBTQ plus person or community. There are pro-gay affirming resources in the church, in culture, in educational institutions. The gay community has risen up. We're still rising up. We still got work to do, but we're here to help you. That's where we all started. We all needed each other to come out of that closet. And you are a beautiful person. Don't think for a moment that God doesn't love his LGBTQ plus people. Those are all cultural driven redefinitions of God's heart. God's heart is for you to be exactly how you were created to be. You were created to bring relational beauty into this world with the identity that you know you have and with your sexual orientation. That's how you were created, to bring beauty into this world. Don't let anybody steal your beauty. Don't let anybody steal your power. And there are resources everywhere in the gay community. There are lots and lots of loving LGBTQ plus men, women, non-binary, trans. We're all here just waiting for the gift of you to join us in our community.
Well, no wonder you were a speaker that everybody wanted to listen to. Amen to you. I'm in your congregation. I'm going to say
anybody email us at bettertogether.
Yes.
At strawhutmedia.com. Did I get it right? No. I was right. And if you want to talk about it or just, there's two mamas here who will love you. So
I think three mamas. I think we got three mamas on board here. I want to encourage. We're going to let them go for a minute, because here's what I would like to say. I thought that today I was going to come into this conversation, and because of that, I have had a history of caring so much about this. A mother who has been involved in whether it was the Exodus community or not. I thought I was going to talk to you about that. I feel so thrilled with what you've talked and spoken to us about. I think you are going to be our LGBTQ community guide on Better Together. I think you are going to be a voice for us to be able to take questions, interests, and even some of my own when I can digest what this conversation was that brings me so much joy. There is not one thing that drove my life more than understanding how to live in your truth. And it is because I saw a man who was a gay man who couldn't live in it. And it looked to me like God did not want that to be the way a family was brought into this world. I believed in love. I believe in truth. I got to the other side where I was able to celebrate and be in celebration with Heather, with Ryan, with the members of our tribe, with you. And I want our community to be able to reach out to their friends, talk about this podcast, and get back to us with some questions question some places and be able to have this be an open conversation with you, a master of the universe who has turned love into something you can see, behold, and embrace and encourage for our other LGBT community members. And I cannot thank you enough. Let us continue this conversation as we go toward in healing and love and light. Thank you for being a part of our show today, Randy. And until next time, love and kindness.
And don't be a dick.
Never!
We're better together with Ann and Heather.
All right. Well, the takeaway from that, I hope that everybody listening receives the message and shares the message that we love one another for who they are. God made us exactly the way we're supposed to be.
And in Randy Thomas's words, do not steal anybody's beauty.
Don't do it.
All have
Don't do
100% beauty. Let's encourage it in each other so we can have 1,000%. Have a beautiful day. Until next time, live in loving kindness.
And don't be a dick. If you or somebody you know is struggling with any of the issues we discussed on this show, please look at the show notes for some valuable resources.
And a big thanks to our Better Together team, Ryan Tillotson, Sebastian Alcala, Daniel Ferreira, and of course, Ann and Heather. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whatever device or platform you're listening to this on. And as always, see you next week.
We're better together with Ann and Heather.